Me and Karen. A love story. Just kidding. Karen is a total bitch, but buckle up, because he is my novel. My husband and I are in our late 30s and child-free. Some people on child-free said I should post here too, so enjoy the saga. My husband and I had been saving up for almost a decade to move to a tropical paradise. About 2 years ago, we bit the bullet and moved to our dream location. Housing here is super expensive, like Hawaii prices, so all we could afford was half of a duplex. It is beautiful and on the water with places for our boat. Unfortunately, Karen, Billy Bob, the boyfriend, and her 3 gremlins live in the other unit. The setup. There was some period of time we just went for a week here and there, but we live here full-time now. The entire duplex was owned by an older gentleman who rented out both sides. The sides do not match at all. One side is a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. The other side of the duplex is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. We bought the 5-bedroom. On our side of the property, we have 90% of the backyard, a gazebo, and dockage, about 150 feet, since it is on a corner. The other side has a small backyard, patio, and maybe 15 feet of dockage. The rental leases say the renters are entitled to their specific backyards, but there were no fences or anything, so all the renters shared the entire backyard. After we bought the house, Karen immediately tried to throw her weight around that they expected to continue with that privilege. I told her that if she asked politely, we would try to accommodate her. She thought this meant she could use our backyard whenever she wanted. The party incident. One day, my husband and I were enjoying some drinks outside when a delivery truck showed up to set up a giant blow-up thing in our backyard. I asked Karen what the fuck she thought she was doing, and she said it was her kid's birthday. Then she had the gall to say it was a family and friends only event, so we had to stay inside our house. Not wanting to be a total asshole and ruin some little girl's birthday, I told Karen that after this she had no access to our backyard, period. Karen shrugged and kept setting up for the party. During the party, a drunk adult wandered into our house, which shocked us all. I said Karen's house is on the other side, and he said, oh, Karen said she owned the whole property and to use whichever bathroom was available. I directed him to Karen's bathroom, and soon after, she came storming into our house, screaming about how dare we make her look bad to her friends and how selfish we were that we couldn't even spare one bathroom. She said we didn't deserve all this space with just us. I told Karen to get the hell out of my house or I would be calling the cops. She finally left and the party wrapped up shortly after. The backyard remodel. After the party incident, we decided we needed to clearly define the backyard and build a fence. While we were spending the money, we decided to update the patio, put in a fire pit and an outdoor kitchen. While the contractor was on site, nosy Karen had to come investigate. Since the fence would be the last thing built, I was vague and just stuck to telling her about the patio update. You could see her face light up because, of course, in her mind, what's ours is hers. When the workers started on the fence, Karen came out screaming for the work to stop. I went outside and told the workers to keep working and told Karen to butt out. Of course, in true Karen fashion, she called the cops. What happened next was hilarity on my part after explaining to the cop that we were building a fence on our property and the landlord, of which Karen was not, knew about it. When the cop gave Karen a stern lecture, I thought her head was going to explode. She went back into her house and slammed the sliding door so hard it sounded like something cracked. We got our fence and I thought that would be the end, but of course not. The boat incident. One day, Billy Bob entered the picture and he was as much of a terrible neighbor as Karen. He would throw cigarette butts and empty beer cans over our fence for disrespecting his woman. I didn't know Paradise had trailer trash, but Billy Bob is the epitome of the stereotype. Billy Bob has a boat, a 30-foot fishing boat, to be precise. Of course, that side of the duplex only has 15 feet of dockage. Since we have so much dockage and only one boat, we rent out the other dockage spots as month to month. People come and go, so if we don't receive rent from them by the end of the month and the boat disappears, we think nothing of it. We had a renter who tied up their boat on the property line, but Billy Bob wanted to park his boat and needed that space. Karen and Billy Bob posed as us. We were out of town, told the renters to be gone at the end of the month, and then parked Billy Bob's boat on the dockage. I only found out about it weeks later because the renter left a nasty review on the rental site we use. They said we were rude and went back on the verbal agreement to let them stay for 3 more months. I was like, what the fuck is all this? After a phone call, I quickly put 2 and 2 together. I called the cops, who told Karen and Billy Bob they needed to move their boat, or it would be towed, the equivalent of it anyway. Karen and Billy Bob started screaming that the boat was fully on their property. It isn't, then changed to no one can own the water, true, but a seawall is deeded, that we were liars, and at some point Billy Bob punched a cop and went to jail. I felt bad for the cops, so I took them all snacks the next day with a note apologizing for neighbor drama. I ended up winning my small claim suit against them for lost rental income. But, of course, I haven't seen a dime. I eventually convinced the dockage renters to come back and gave them a few months free as compensation. The final revenge. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Get ready for a juicy justice boner. So, with the collapsing market, we were trying to figure out what to do with our savings when a perfect opportunity opened up. The landlord who owned both properties was in desperate need of some cash and was tired of managing the property from 2,000 miles away. Because, of course, Karen is a Karen and called him weekly for every little thing. His only stipulation was that we let the poor single mum, who has been his renter for 8 years, finish her lease, which is up in July. Since we had money, we were trying to reinvest, and because now we get to control our neighbors, heck yeah, we jumped on that. Since we didn't need a realtor or mortgage, and an inspection had been done just a year ago for the old landlord to refinance, everything closed in just under 2 weeks. Karen was aware of a change of ownership. We registered the property under an LLC, but didn't know who, until 8 days ago. I went over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. Karen answered with a, "What the fuck do you want, cunt?" I smiled, handed her our landlord information, and sweetly reminded her rent was due by Friday, but she could just hand me the check if that was easier. I've always heard descriptions of people's faces turning white, but this was the first time I have actually seen it. I told Karen that we were honoring her lease until the end of July, but afterwards she had better make plans to move because we intended to remodel it before these next tenants moved in. Bye, bitch. Edit? A lot of people misunderstood the beginning. Let's call our side of the duplex, Duplex OP. The other duplex is Duplex Karen. We purchased Duplex OP. After we bought it, Duplex OP was no longer a rental. Both Duplex OP and Duplex Karen were for sale independently, but we only had the money to buy Duplex OP. Duplex Karen is still a rental because it has never sold. Now we own both Duplex OP and Duplex Karen. Duplex Karen is still a rental. Duplex OP is still not a rental. When we made property improvements to Duplex OP, it was ours and not a rental. Update 1. Not much to update, folks. Karen and family's lease isn't up until the end of July. Rent has been paid on time. As far as I know, she doesn't have a new place lined up. We've served her a 30-day notice that we will not be renewing the lease. We also offered in writing that we will prorate July and waive the termination fee if they want to leave before the end of the lease. Beyond the near-weekly loud parties and having to call the police because the kids were throwing lit fireworks at our boat, not much beyond the norm. Update 2. Long story short, Karen and family are still in the place and not paying any rent. They were served with eviction, but due to COVID stuff, we can't actually do anything about it. At least Karen and Billy Bob had a giant fight, which ended up in him being arrested and he hasn't returned. I've been told by our lawyer, once and Lord, laws are changed or removed in September, we can have the police escort them off the property that day since we've already filed the eviction. It's just a shit show right now. Karen is being extra smug. She tried pushing her bounds and kept coming over to our property. A talk with the cops set her straight, but she's playing music loud and just tossing her trash everywhere. We really wanted to move our elderly parents in after a quick remodel because Dad needs shoulder surgery badly and Mum now needs a walker. They need more care, and it's getting harder driving 2 hours a day to do that. Our parents want their own space, though, and won't live on our side with us. My husband and I are trying not to be angry and make things worse with Karen, but we are both exhausted. Things just suck. Since we couldn't evict her, my partner went to stay with their parents for a few months so the in-laws could get the surgery and care they needed. They are doing better now, which is great. Here's the weird part, though. In October, Karen's mother, Susan, came to live with her since Susan's landlord chose not to renew her lease. Susan is an angel. Susan was mortified at Karen's and the kids' behavior. Susan is a tough one and has been cleaning house, both figuratively and literally. The kids are so much better behaved, and Karen stomps around like a sullen child. Susan and I share drinks every few days in the backyard. We bake together too every weekend. For Thanksgiving and Christmas, since no one was traveling for the holidays, we made a big feast and set it up outside with some backyard games. It was a great time, and even Karen was being pleasant. I tried to tell Susan not to worry about rent until they find another place, but she insisted on paying. I lied about how much the rent was, so it's only a half payment, but it just covers the taxes, insurance. We drew up another lease that is month to month. Susan wants to move back home at some point and take her daughter with her. Karen, I think, is ready for a change too, but obviously with COVID it might take some time. It's pretty pleasant right now so I'm in no hurry for them to leave. Life. This happened about 4 years ago, but I recently found out how part of my revenge plan panned out, which is what prompted me to post this. I have never shared this with anyone before. Background. My mum has been best friends with Eileen, not her real name, since they were both kids, and Eileen has kind of been like an aunt to me. About 5 years ago, Eileen's husband of more than 25 years surprised her by asking for a divorce. Eileen lived about 6 hours away from my mom at the time, and I lived out of state, so I didn't find out how everything went down until a few months after their divorce was finalized. Unfortunately, Eileen's life kind of spiraled out of control after the separation or divorce. She developed depression and a drinking problem. But my mom and some other childhood friends were able to convince her to move back to her hometown, and then they convinced her to go to rehab. I moved back home shortly before Eileen went to rehab, and because my school work schedule was pretty flexible, I was able to house sit and take care of some stuff while she was in rehab. The first time I visited her in rehab, I got the whole divorce story and it was bad. Eileen's ex, Jeff, also not his real name, hadn't talked to Eileen about any problems prior to asking for a divorce, so she just assumed he fell out of love with her. But I was immediately skeptical about the things Eileen told me. First, Jeff, who was an executive at a pharmaceutical company earning mid-six figures, was fired from his job a year before they split up and decided to take a break before looking for another job. It was weird to me that Jeff decided to take a break from work, because he'd always been such a workaholic. Eileen hasn't worked in years because of a disability, but she has some property and a trust her parents left her that lets her live a comfortable life without working. Jeff and Eileen lived off money from the trust while he was unemployed. Then, after Jeff said he wanted a divorce, he refused to go to couples therapy or talk about why he wanted the divorce. The only thing he would say was that they had grown apart and that he was sick of being with a woman like Eileen. He said Eileen's mother was right about her. Eileen's mother was a classic narcissist, and she bullied Eileen horribly about her attractiveness, weight, intelligence, etc., which caused a lot of psychological problems that Jeff knows about. Finally, right after the divorce was finalized, Jeff moved out of state, but to a state he didn't have any family or connections in. Jeff's parents are still alive and in their 80s or 90s, and Jeff is pretty close to them. So it didn't make any sense to me why Jeff wouldn't move to be closer to them if he wanted to move after the divorce. I didn't say anything to Eileen because I didn't want to upset her, but I thought Jeff might have been having an affair, had orchestrated his unemployment to avoid paying alimony, and then moved out of state to be with his mistress. I just didn't have a way to confirm it at the time. The investigation. Then Eileen asked me to look for a box of Jeff's stuff he had asked her to hold for him until he moved into his new apartment. She told me all the info on the box, contents, and his new address was in an email he sent her, and she gave me the password to her computer so I could access the email. This is where I lucked out. It turns out Jeff had used her computer and set up his email on the computer. I accidentally clicked on the app for his email when I was searching for Eileen's email. I decided to take a peek at his email. The first thing I noticed was that he had mostly stopped using that email address 3 years before, which was about 1 year before he was fired. In a folder for digital receipts, I found a confirmation email for a dating site, either Plenty of Fish or Match, I can't remember which I think he saved there accidentally. I also found a verification email for a new email address. I started to put together a speculative timeline of what happened. I guessed that about 3 years before, Jeff started an affair and, shortly after, he decided to get a new email address to help keep the affair secret. I wanted to access his dating profile to get more information, so I tried to use the forgot password feature to see if I could generate an email that would allow me to reset the password and log in that way. Unfortunately, the dating site didn't recognize Jeff's old email address. I thought I might be able to get into Jeff's new email using his old email to reset the password, and then, maybe, I could use the new email to get into the dating website. But I didn't want to risk locking Jeff out of his new email and alerting him until I knew more about what he'd done. And here's where I totally lucked out. The email app Jeff downloaded to Eileen's MacBook had a note feature, and super genius Jeff saved some passwords on notes. Most of the passwords weren't helpful, but I did get the password to the dating site and his Twitter and Netflix accounts. I logged into the dating site using his new email address and the password. I was able to read messages Jeff sent to another woman before he broke up with Eileen. The new mistress sent Jeff her email address in one of the messages. I searched Facebook for the mistress's email address and found her profile. I couldn't read the mistress's posts, but she left her photos public. She had recent photos of her and Jeff, so I knew they were still together. She also posted a photo of a construction crew breaking ground on a new home for her and Jeff, which was interesting, because I got the impression from Eileen that Jeff didn't have a lot of money after the divorce. Here's where my background is important. At the time, I was attending law school. I moved back to my hometown for one semester for a legal residency, and I had access to Lexis database, specifically their public records database. I had spent a good portion of one of my summer internships tracking down property records and other assets to help recover judgments for clients, so I knew how to search for public records. The mistress had purchased several acres in a wealthy suburb several months before Jeff filed for divorce, and there was no mortgage listed on the record. I'd already found the mistress's LinkedIn page, so I knew she worked as an executive assistant before she moved out of state with Jeff. She didn't advertise her salary, but I doubted she could have afforded the property with her salary alone. It's possible she had money outside her salary, but I suspected Jeff gave her money to purchase the land before he filed for divorce. I also found an updated record in Lexis showing Jeff and the mistress as joint owners of the property. I called the county recorder's office to confirm ownership of the property, dates, etc. The mistress had filed a quitclaim just 5 weeks after Jeff's divorce was finalized. I was still hesitant to try to log into Jeff's new email, so I decided to check his old email again to see if there was anything else I should investigate before moving to the new email. I didn't find anything, but I noticed that several passwords in his notes were the same. I decided to try to log into his new email using the same password he used for the dating site. I figured the two accounts were created around the same time, so if he had recycled a password, that was the most likely candidate. It worked. His new email was a goldmine. Because this story is already getting ridiculously long, I'll list some of the relevant stuff I found. Jeff hadn't been fired from his old job. He quit and lied to Eileen. I found an email from his admin asking where to have payroll, send his last check and details about a goodbye party for him. Some emails between Jeff and a boat repair person mentioning a leak somewhere on one side of the sailboat near the engine compartment. The repair guy couldn't find the source of the leak, but he talked about current and future problems with mold in the engine on that side. Emails between Jeff and a boat broker, which included the email address of buyers farther down in the string. An emailed report from the boat inspector, which didn't include the leak or any mold damage or potential damage to the engine. Emails between Jeff and his contractor about changes made to the new house's sunroom. Something about a 3-season sunroom versus a 4-season sunroom, and the construction needing to be modified to deal with the weight of snow. Emails between Jeff and the mistress. They had married. The mistress and Jeff shared a calendar. Some flirty emails between Jeff and another woman. Emails with info on Jeff's new employer. I downloaded all the important emails and their attachments and started thinking about a revenge plan. The revenge. To my mind, everything was fair game. He lied about being fired, so I wanted him fired from his new job. I suspected he hid his money before his separation from Eileen to help pay for his new house, so I wanted him to lose his house. He cheated, so I wanted to destroy his new relationship. Anything I could do about the boat was a bonus. The easiest place to start was the boat. I had no idea if the source of the leak was found and repaired, or if the leak was verbally disclosed to the buyer. But I figured Jeff was a lying jerk, so odds were fair he hid the info from the new buyer. I sent the emails between Jeff and the repairman and another copy of the inspection to the buyer. I searched Jeff's county court website 5 or 6 months later and found out the buyers filed a suit against Jeff and the broker and inspector. I couldn't figure out how to take or destroy Jeff's house, so I settled for contacting the county inspector's office to complain about the sunroom not being up to code. This is actually what prompted me to write this post because I just found out some details about what happened with the county inspectors. Keep in mind, I heard about this from a third party years after the fact, so I don't know all the details. It turns out the sunroom was code compliant, but the inspector did find a workshop attached to the detached garage that wasn't on the original permit or plans. The workshop had a bathroom that the contractor attached to the property's septic system after the initial inspection. A mutual friend of Eileen and Jeff told Eileen and me, and he guessed this was a big deal because the size of the septic system they installed wasn't sized to handle the additional input, but I don't know for sure. Jeff had to pay a fine and the workshop had to be removed. This ended up causing construction delays, which will become relevant below. As for destroying Jeff's marriage, my first impulse was to send the new wife the flirty emails between Jeff and the other woman, but when I searched for that woman on social media, I couldn't find anything. I had no way of knowing if the new wife knew the other woman and would think that the emails weren't important or evidence of an affair. Then, I played around with the idea of updating Jeff's dating profile and sending stuff to his wife. But it would take too long to manufacture a fake relationship with real dates and times, and I was worried that Jeff might get an email alert from the dating site that would clue him in. I ended up just risking that the new wife wouldn't know the other woman. I pretended to be someone concerned about an affair between Jeff and the new woman. Overall, I kept the accusation vague, but I did say Jeff and the new woman went out to eat and to the movies on a few dates. Jeff's shared calendar said the new wife was out of town. I couldn't come up with a way to get Jeff fired. I rechecked his email and calendar over several weeks, looking for something I could use to get him fired. Eventually, my legal residency got too busy to devote much time to revenge, so I decided to just let it go. Eileen recently reconnected with a friend she shared with Jeff, and that friend gave Eileen an update on Jeff. Eileen shared the details with me, and that's what reminded me of what I did and prompted this story. It turned out that I didn't need to worry about sabotaging Jeff's career. By luck, the woman Jeff had been emailing was actually his assistant at his new job, and Jeff's new boss was his brother-in-law. Jeff and his new wife actually moved to her hometown so she could be close to her family, and so Jeff could go to work for his new brother-in-law. I have no idea if Jeff actually was cheating. He told the mutual friend who passed this story on to Eileen that they hadn't been having an affair. It didn't matter to the new wife, though, because she and Jeff got together when Jeff was already married. She didn't have a lot of trust for Jeff. She didn't believe Jeff's denials when I sent the email about him having an affair. She filed for divorce, and Jeff's brother-in-law boss fired him. And since the construction was delayed, the new house wasn't finished when Jeff and his new wife divorced. They had to sell an unfinished home, and Jeff took a big financial hit. Finally, these weren't part of my larger revenge plan, but I am pretty petty. So, I took the box of Jeff's stuff, mostly photographs, and threw them away. I told Eileen they must have been lost in the move. Signed both of Jeff's email addresses up for a bunch of spam, newsletters, mailing lists, etc. Deleted his Netflix watch list. Posted, retweeted, and liked a bunch of porn on his Twitter account and deleted all the accounts he was following. The ending. I never told Eileen what I did because I wanted her to have plausible deniability and I didn't want to interfere with her recovery. She doesn't know about the boat lawsuit or the Netflix or Twitter stuff, but she did take satisfaction from his divorce and job loss. I probably would have let it all go if Jeff had just cheated, because I had always really liked Jeff. I always thought he was nice, but I was obviously wrong about him. Nice people don't weaponize childhood abuse to mentally torture their wives. As far as I'm concerned, Jeff deserved everything I did to him. Lord screwed with the wrong tenant for too long. This will be decently long, as it needs some context. I'm going to throw in a lot of stuff to make it all easier to understand as well. Minor details might not be entirely accurate, as I have no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city, as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom, in a major city anyway. In a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community center, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying, and always read and inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either, should I ever have need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer. Or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well. But there's a problem. Only I can write checks and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord we might. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from landlord, because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly we got a summons to the rental housing tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day, but now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I bitched to the neighbor who was also the superintendent and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding first of the month no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us. So we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times I could ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that, and my roommates don't care. After being split between us all, the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished. So did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at shit pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I am not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kind of exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with, and with my experience in the RHT I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second. So I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice, I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up. 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there, for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once, that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes. The one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had one on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end, I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't though. By Mark. Edit to clarify a few things based on questions. I also want to add, for those good landlords out there, I do feel for you. My time in the RHT was eye-opening. For every bad landlord, there are 10 bad tenants easily. There is a massive debate of debates to have over the whole thing. I'll only say that I do sympathize with the good landlords out there. I'm not trying to paint all landlords as terrible. This is the only landlord I've ever had that was so useless. Edit. I've revised my estimate of the ratio based on a little research and some comments from 30 tenants per landlord to 10. I'm probably still wrong, but the sheer number disparity between landlords and tenants effectively requires there be more bad tenants than bad landlords, simply because there are so many more tenants than landlords. I'm going to leave it at that and just beg you not to rip me apart from either side. I'm intimately aware of the problems both good landlords and good tenants face, and my sympathy goes out to both sides. My foster parents treated me like crap, so I obliterated their reputation in our small town. My parents were both killed in a hit-and-run car accident when I was 10. My dad was only 39 and my mum 35. Neither of them had relatives who could take me in. We lived in a really small church-going town where everyone knew one another. My dad had been the heir to a small fortune and so didn't really have to work. He didn't like the big city, so he and my mum decided to move to a small town where he could have an antique store. My mum was into collecting antiques. I would have had to go the orphanage route when they died, but this couple from the church, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. Banks, made this big to-do in church about how a little girl needs a loving home, and God has given us this joyous task of bringing her up in our home and hearts. It's been a long time, and I don't remember if those were Mrs. Banks' exact words, but they were something cringeworthy like that. The Banks had their own daughter, Kitty, who was a year older than me. That should have meant we would be super good friends, but Kitty had her own thing going and practically ignored me. She was a holier-than-thou type. The Banks received a stipend from the state to take care of me, but they also received checks every month from my dad's estate, which was supposed to take care of me until I was 18. When I did turn 18, I would receive full control of my inheritance. The Banks weren't exactly cruel to me, but in private it was clear they were just using me to build up their reputation in town. In front of other people, they'd fawn over me in a sick, cotton candy fashion that made me uncomfortable. They'd also make Kitty be nice to me in public, which she resented. The Banks would also put on a big show whenever social workers came to check up on me. They'd coach me before the lady would come and tell me to praise how godly and wonderful they were. After the social worker left, they'd go right back to ignoring me and spending my dad's money on crap on the internet or on trips. It was clear to me, even as a tween and teen, that the Banks were only using some of my endowment, both from the state and from my trust, to take care of me. The rest they spent on themselves. As I grew older, I could see that my foster parents would pretend as though they had great business acumen, and that's why they had more money, and could buy a new Volvo. Where I'm from, a new Volvo is an event, and take a trip to New York and buy fancy clothes for Kitty. When I was 17, I noticed that my foster parents were stockpiling my trust fund money to pay for Kitty's tuition to college. Throughout this time, the Banks would never outright say so, but would heavily imply that I owed them, and that once I got control of my inheritance, I should be godly and generous and give them some material compensation for all the work they did to raise me. I think they already got lots of material compensation, especially since Mrs. Banks practically stole all of my mum's antiques from her store and kept them for herself, gave them to Kitty, or gave them to her other relatives. One thing my mum never kept at her store was an extremely expensive, Baroque-era fine china set, absolutely complete and worth tens of thousands of dollars. Not a replica, but the real deal. So real, Napoleon Bonaparte himself might well have eaten a steak off those plates. Probably not, but you get the point. It was my china set, of course, but Mrs. Banks thought I was an idiot and didn't know that. She would always talk about how this china set will go to Kitty on her wedding day. Mrs. Banks assumed that since I always dressed like a tomboy, didn't care about all my mum's antiques that Mrs. Banks stole or gave away, that I just didn't care about the china set. When I was a kid, my mum told me that things were things, and not to obsess over them. So, having the frou-frou china set for myself wasn't an issue. What was an issue was Mrs. Banks acting like it was hers to give away. Wrong lady. So, once Kitty went off to college, thanks to my biological mum and dad's money, I had to make my own plans. I had always done well in school, and had actually gotten a partial scholarship to attend school out of state. The rest, I could easily pay for with my inheritance, which I would very soon have control of. Per usual, Mr. and Mrs. Banks were haranguing me about how I owed them compensation. And since I was going to be rich soon, I ought to share the wealth. I figured that over the past 7 years they probably stole or misappropriated more than $200,000 of my parents' money, to say nothing of the state money they misused. I think they more than shared the wealth. I never promised anything. I just smiled and kept a tally of every single bank statement. I got them quarterly that my trust issued over the years. The Banks family never shared them with me, of course. But when I asked the actual bank for a rundown, they were more than happy to oblige. I also wrote down every single major purchase my foster parents clearly made over the past 7 years with money that was clearly beyond their means as a housewife and an insurance salesman. Things such as a 40 grand car for cash, a used 20 grand car for cash that they gave to Kitty, trips to Hawaii, New York, cash gifts to the church that made them look super generous at my deceased parents' expense. I kept it all in a nice 3-ring binder. I had already arranged my travel to my new campus. I didn't have much stuff at the bank's house anyway, and had zero intention of coming back, at least to their home. The Banks knew I was leaving, but didn't bother seeing me off, because they assumed I'd come back to give them their due. I waited for our church's yearly antique sale extravaganza, set to begin in 3 days. Per usual, the Banks donated all sorts of random stuff, many of them knickknacks that used to belong to my mum, and technically belonged to me. They weren't shy about giving away my stuff and taking credit for it. While Mr. and Mrs. Banks were on one of their shopping sprees with my parents' money and away from their house, I boxed up the china set and brought it to church. I told the rummage sale committee that Mrs. Banks wanted to donate the priceless antiques for sale, all benefits, to go to the church. This donation is made in the name of Mr. and Mrs. Banks. I was being fair. If Mrs. Banks was really so godly, she would be delighted that such a wonderful donation be made in her name. Sadly, I knew she'd go the other way, because she was faker than porn star implants. The ladies were flabbergasted, especially when I told them the appraisal of the set's value. I also told them that if they needed proof of ownership and right to sell, to contact the number of a certain attorney in New York. They thanked me profusely and praised the Lord Jesus for Mrs. Banks' generosity. This would be the most expensive item in their sales history. Everyone knew no one could afford to buy the set outright, but everyone would love to buy the pieces piecemeal. Like, I got a cup and saucer, or I got one of the charges. I got an egg cup. The Banks were supposed to work the sale the second day, and I wasn't there. What I did hear was that my foster mum went ballistic when she saw her china set for sale, and that it was a huge hit, and ladies from all over the county had bought pieces of it, and it raised so much money for the church. My foster mum threw a tantrum and said that I had stolen the set from her house. The ladies at the church explained that I had made the donation in her name, and she was getting credit for the donation to the church. My foster mum was practically yanking her hair out, according to what I heard later. She was trying to track down who had bought pieces and trying to get them back. Of course, she was unsuccessful. What she was successful in was looking like a grade A douchebag. The entire church thought she was selfish and materialistic and acting very ungodly, especially the way she cursed her foster daughter. A week later, my foster parents received a package by registered mail from me and my attorney. It contained my binder where I showed my bank statements and also a list of all their spending extravagances. It also contained a warning from my attorney that should they ever try to contact me again for money, they will receive a bill and a cot date. That was that. 10 years later, I work as a third-grade teacher. I'm married to an accountant, and we have a 3-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. Kitty ended up working through college, and as we've gotten older, we've reconnected. She apologized for the way she acted when we were kids. We're friends now and see each other multiple times a year, often just for lunch. She's an elementary school teacher too and married to an engineer. She has a 4-year-old daughter. Both of our older kids play together when our families meet. We both have our own wedding china. She has gone to a lot of therapy due to her toxic parents, she tells me. As for her parents, they still live in their small town because they are too broke to move. Their reputation is that of being that couple who drove both their children away and stole money from that poor little girl whose parents died. And they tried to steal money from Jesus when they whined about getting their Baroque china back. I hope your Volvo was worth it, assholes. My revenge on Loony Lucy, contender for world's worst roommate. Bring your popcorn, because this is a long one. Loony Lucy is a slovenly, food-stealing, clothing-destroying waste of carbon. I dealt with it by keeping my space clean and ignoring her errors, storing my food at work or my boyfriend's place, and installing a lock on my bedroom door so she couldn't borrow outfits that looked like she could fit into when she had 30 pounds on me. All that made Loony Lucy a bad roommate, but I had my workarounds, and she had the one saving grace of being quiet at night. So I put up with it. That is, until she broke our cardinal roommate rule. No one gets a key to the apartment without both roommates agreeing. The rule was sacred. I couldn't even give a key to my boyfriend of more than a year. Unbeknownst to me, Loony Lucy had met a guy online who lived several hours away. Within 2 weeks of meeting him, she invites him to meet IRL and stay over for the weekend. Loony Lucy then mailed this strange man a key to our apartment because he was going to get into town before she got off work. You read that right. A man she talked to for only 2 weeks, had never actually met, and who I didn't know about now had a key to our shared apartment, and she wasn't going to be there to greet him. But I was. I'm starting laundry while wearing only my Victoria's Secret robe because I'll be hopping into the shower right after. I hear the lock snick, turn around and see the door swing open to reveal a thin, creepy-looking guy in a trench coat who just stands there silently while I freeze like a fucking idiot rabbit. CLG suddenly steps forward into the apartment. I come out of my startle, scream bloody murder, and chuck the laundry detergent at his head before scrambling into my bedroom and locking the door. He's yelling that it's okay. His Loony Lucy's boyfriend. I scream at him that I don't care who he is. Get out, or I'm calling the cops and my 6'4" built like a tank boyfriend. CLG leaves and to his credit, even locks the door behind him. Poor CLG. I call Loony Lucy and ask her if CLG is her boyfriend and if she gave him a key. She said he was, and she did. She gushes about how they met. I hang up on her mid-sentence and call my boyfriend, who, lucky me, actually is 6'4" and built like a tank. He comes over, we pack up the essentials, and I move in with him that day. We hadn't thought we were quite ready for that step. Turns out that in the face of Loony Lucy, we were. No apology, or even excuses from Loony Lucy when boyfriend and I go back the next week to get the rest of my stuff. She yells at me that it's my fault that I overreacted, and that I'm lucky CLG didn't press charges for the mild concussion my laundry detergent gave him. Now, I'm slow to true anger. I'll bitch and moan with the rest of them, but actual rage is not in my usual repertoire of emotions. But guess what? I'm there now. Loony Lucy needs to pay. Still have that popcorn? Good. Now, the 2-year lease is in my name only because Loony Lucy's credit is so shitty that nowhere in the good part of town would take her. She'd been living with her parents over an hour away from her job for months before we started rooming together. Hindsight tells me this is because no one else would room with her prior to me. Hindsight's a bitch. So there's nothing legally preventing me from subletting the apartment for the remaining 14 months on the lease. I could also evict her, but that wouldn't be nearly as fun as what I decided to do instead. I post a roommate ad on Craigslist and make it quite the deal. I'll keep my original deposit on file and pay the first 2 months' rent and sublet fee, on the condition that they know they are living with a food-thieving, clothing-destroying, bitchy slob. I may want revenge, but I'm not willing to sucker some innocent person into it. Over the next couple of weeks, I get a few nibbles, but no one has the flavor I'm looking for to match Loony Lucy. Then I get a message from Kevin. Kevin goes down my list of warnings. Kevin doesn't care about the food thieving. He orders takeout and hates leftovers. For obvious reasons, Kevin isn't worried about Loony Lucy borrowing his clothes. And Kevin admits that he's a huge slob, and not having to pay attention to it is actually a plus. Kevin says the 2 months' rent seems kind of excessive, and that there must be more to the story if I'm willing to pay that on top of the deposit and the sublet fee. So I tell Kevin the rest of the story. Kevin tells me he'll take the deal, but I should know something about him. Kevin says he is very happily active in the single scene, not looking to settle down, but very much looking to continue bringing home a revolving door of fuck buddies. Sometimes they'll stay for a couple days or a week at a time, so it's good to know the key rule isn't really that big a deal. I tell him it sounds like he and Loony Lucy will be a good roommate match. Kevin fills out the paperwork, the leasing office does its credit and background check, and gives it the green light. I mailed Kevin my key. Kevin moves in. I get a frantic call from Loony Lucy about a strange man showing up, saying he lives there with her now. I tell her that's right, he does, and explain the subletting process. She starts raging at me. I hang up and mute her calls. Over the next few days, I get a lot of voicemails. Some raging, some whining, some begging. Loony Lucy has been forced to clean and take out the trash like a slave or something because Kevin doesn't bother. Loony Lucy can't move out because she can't get a lease anywhere else and her parents won't let her move back home. Loony Lucy has to keep paying her half of the rent because Kevin told her that if she stopped, he'd change the locks and move all her stuff out. After a few weeks of radio silence, Loony Lucy calls again, and I decide to pick up. She tells me she's so happy to get a hold of me. I have to do something. Kevin is now bringing men home every couple of nights, and sometimes they don't leave for days and days. Yeah, having a roommate who hands out keys without your consent to guys you don't know is a bitch, isn't it? I posted this on Petty Revenge, but I think it belongs here as well. I used to manage a catering company for my boss while he was undergoing chemotherapy. This was one of my first gigs where I was in charge. The bride calls me at 1 in the afternoon, the day before the wedding, and decides she wanted a cheaper menu. She and her husband already paid for almost everything, and it's far too late to change anything. I told her that, but she started throwing a bitch fit, saying that she wants to change the steak to a chicken, and demanded we either serve chicken or charge her the price of the chicken, and she will not be paying for anything extra. I informed her that, according to the contract, she is to receive 150 steak lunches at a price of $50 per plate, and it also states that she can't change the menu unless she does it at least a month before the wedding. When she hears this, she flips the hell out and starts screaming at me, calling me illiterate and telling me her fiancé is a lawyer and they will sue me, etc. She handed the phone over to her fiancé, and he also started screaming at me, saying it's his damn wedding and he can have whatever he wants. They end up firing me at the moment, and I inform them that the cancellation fee is 90% of the cost of catering, which I was already paid for, and they start screaming at me, telling me that I ain't shit, and they can get anyone to cater for them, and they are going to make me pay for it, etc. They end up hanging up on me, thank God, and I had an inkling that I should probably keep making the food in case they call tomorrow and they want us to cater. So we finish cooking and the next day at 7 a.m. I get a call from the groom and he demands that I come down there to cater the wedding or they are going to sue me for not providing service. I calmly tell the guy that they terminated the contract yesterday, and as per the termination clause in the contract, we are entitled to keep 90% of the entire cost of catering. He is raging. He didn't say anything, but I can feel how mad he is over the phone. After a moment of awkward silence, I inform him that if he would like us to cater the event, he has to do same-day catering, which is 3 times the original price I charged him. He has to pay all fees in advance, and the food depends on what we have available and ready, and we also reserve the right to refuse service. He gets really pissed off at this point, telling us this is extortion. He already paid for food, so he didn't have to pay again. I informed him again of the termination clause and also informed him that the food was for a previous contract, and that contract had ended, and he would have to pay for it again. He ended up starting a new contract with us, and for 3 times the original price. He tried to change the menu again, just to spite me, but I then made sure he knew I reserved the right to refuse service. He and his bridezilla kept everything the same, down to the baby carrots and, of course, the steak, all while paying me 3 times the original price if they had just stuck with the original contract. As soon as we got to the venue, before I got anything out, I made the bride and groom sign the new contract and pay me completely in advance, 22 grand, and left to deposit the money. While I was gone, they harassed my caterers and threatened someone with deportation, even though they were legal. He tried to sue us later, and the judge heard the recorded phone calls, saw the contract, and told him to pay my legal fees. I looked them up on Facebook recently. Apparently, they are divorced now. It's only been 3 years. Cue the long, expensive revenge. This happened in the early 2000s when I joined a startup. We agreed on a salary and no paid overtime and an evaluation in 3 months and then annually. Standard stuff, mostly. It was a very mediocre salary for the work, but I really liked the work itself, which was extremely interesting and challenging. For me, even if the finances were SOSO, I felt I'd learn a lot of skills, which would be useful in the future. After 3 years and having 10 decent clients and a bunch of clients trialing and money rolling in, the talk turned to back pay and paid overtime plus compensating for past overtime. At that point, around $50,000 in overtime had been accrued, which is a lot. Legally, it couldn't be back pay, so the talk was always of a discretionary bonus. Now, at this point, everyone is okay with this, myself included, and this was discussed in writing via company emails too, so I felt secure and that no bad will was in play. I felt the company should be able to afford the payment. Equally, I'd happily settle for equity at a discount, which is legally possible there, if cash flow was an issue. The discussions about back pay, possible equity, and paid overtime started to drag on, and I was getting irked by this. In the end, I was made an offer of equity, which meant the company valuation was far beyond anything reasonable, in the hundreds of millions, and I'd get a minuscule stake. Less than 0.01% of a company with 9 employees and a projected annual turnover of around 2 million. It was an FU of sorts to stiff me out of money, and I didn't want to take that lying down. To say I was furious was an understatement. Anyway, the day he made that offer, I handed in my resignation. This sent the CTO into panic mode because the CEO had refused an updated contract, and I was still on a 1-month notice period, plus I had a lot of untaken paid leave. Basically, it meant I was walking out right then and there. So, off I went that very same day, to the shock and surprise of everyone, I guess. The next day, I sent an official, registered letter requesting my overtime or back pay and received a negative response, which I followed up with another detailed demand. This was also rejected because the bonus was discretionary and there is no overtime. However, I'd been seeking legal advice, and I understood that they don't have a leg to stand on if I am willing to pay for an attorney. As the liability in such matters is firmly and 100% on the employer, I was willing. You need to understand that going to a lawyer was very rare in those parts back then, so companies didn't generally expect this outcome. Things have since changed. When going through the applicable laws with the attorney, I noticed there is a limitation of 7 years. So, while my attorney was laying out what to do in order to get me my money in as little as a few weeks, I just asked him, what if we wait until it's 6 years? And 11 months after the transgression and then file demanding interest. I wanted this because the law stated that back pay is due at a 9% April above the base rate, 3.25% at that time, accrued daily for every day past the due date. We're looking at 12 to 12.5% compound daily April. The risk is that the company folds in that time, but I decided to take that risk. I sent one final letter stating that I expect all the owed and accrued amounts to date to be paid immediately. Of course, nothing happened. For the next few years, life rolled on. The company did grow and become a known player in the area. When the time came, I found an attorney and started the case. We had copies of all the communications, copies of the registered letters and responses. The back pay demanded now, including interest, was $112,000. What I didn't know was that, in addition to this, there are fixed penalties for each instruction to perform uncompensated overtime. The total demand was something like $135,000. To say that the CEO, who was still CEO, lost his shit would be an understatement. I got a very verbally abusive phone call, which I dutifully recorded as it wasn't completely unexpected, and was added to the filing. The CEO fought, or tried to, But when the judge heard the phone call, he took an immediate dim view. Reading through all the communication just put more nails in the defense's coffin. The judge just ruled and instructed the company to pay immediately and without delay, and also ordered the company to pay all my legal costs. They also got a full audit from the Department of Labor. The company paid up a week later. To add insult to injury, the evening of the court's decision, the CEO apparently got very drunk and crashed his car into another vehicle while drunk. He got a DUI conviction and lost his driving license for half a year, and his insurance refused to pay out for the damages to his vehicle, brand new Mercedes S-Class, as he was drunk. All in all, a glorious day. She got away unscathed. I own an apartment in New York City in Manhattan and decided to rent it out, furnished, and moved to the house I had bought from my infirm mother and take care of her on a full-time basis. She's 87. The rental income was to become my main source of income. My new tenant, a middle-aged woman from Queensland, Australia, lacked previous landlord references since she said she had owned and lived in her home for 30 years. She was gainfully employed, met the financial criteria to qualify, and provided some solid letters of reference. Long story short, she stopped paying the rent 7 months into her 1-year lease. My attempts to contact her were unsuccessful, so I took her to housing court and had her evicted and sued for damages in small claims court, damaged microwave, stained sofas, apartment left in filthy condition. As you can imagine, she skipped the court dates, surreptitiously moved out of the apartment, completely ghosted me, and fled back to Australia, where it would be very expensive for me to remotely hire a local lawyer to domesticate the financial judgments and garnish her wages. I was adamant that she wasn't going to do this to any other landlord and plotted my revenge. She has a very unique name, so I bought her domain name. Let's say her name is Jane Smith. I purchased janesmith.com and built a website. I proceeded to post the details on said website, her photo, an official copy of the financial judgments I won against her. She owes me $16,000 in unpaid rent plus $7,000 plus in damages, including photos of the filth left in the apartment, the damaged furniture and broken microwave, the notice from the marshal posted on the door with eviction details, details about where she worked, and the club she frequents in Queensland to play bridge. I was very careful to only include facts so as not to be accused of slander. I focused on the SEO of the website and managed to have the website be the #1 result when you Google her name. Then I sat back and looked at the stats of the website visits, which showed her employer had visited the site, and I also got emails from some people who had seen her at a professional conference she attended and wanted to let me know her whereabouts. In addition, I communicated with the people who wrote letters of reference on her behalf, which she submitted when she applied for the apartment, and told them about her unscrupulous behavior. It's now going to be 3 years I still own her domain name. The website is still up and still gets visitors, and if you Google her name it's still at the top of the rankings. Although keeping the website going is costing me some dollars, the satisfaction of knowing that she has been publicly unmasked and can't swindle others continues to give me great satisfaction. She arrogantly and callously cost me $20,000 in unpaid rent and damages, and it is now costing her far more than she saved in unpaid rent. Any job she applies for, any apartment she tries to rent, and anyone she tries to date will know the truth behind the mask. Angela in Queensland, you now know, fuck around and find out. And that's all for this round of unhinged Reddit revenge stories. Some of these were downright chaotic, others honestly smart and satisfying. I've got more lined up, so if you've got a favorite type of revenge story, drop it in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next video. Until then, maybe think twice before crossing the wrong person.